might be woodland sage. But you gotta have, okay. Well, if it's two for you, it does appear to be it's predominant. Now, there's other things that look like two. But what I was trying to get at is it's from another part of the state. It's not local dirt like. So a little bit of a lesson. If you're not all of us are purists, it's okay. But ideally, you would bring plants within like 100 miles, no further than that of your home, because you're going to mix germplasm from different areas of the state, which someday, especially this day and age, where everyone's splitting all the species into new things, you might discover that, oh, this is now considered a different species from that. This would be like scalp photo with sage, so buy plants, try to buy them from nurseries that really good.
So like they better anyway because of the ecosystem, R10B.
Right, and not only that, I mean different soils, like the tuberose that you can see in the Everglades grows in like carboniferous soils. Anyways, the wood sage is a wildfire that's rhizomatous and spreads, and will fill in a spot pretty well. And does have it's a real pretty flowers on a blue stalk, almost like a salvia. It's related to salvia. Flowers. That makes sense.
No, that's from some.
Okay. That makes sense. So this is probably okay. She probably got it. So here we have two Spanish stoppers. We're going to put these all in one thing. Have this small one here.
My old brain, I meant to say Simpson and it came out Spanish.
You guys are making me feel old.
Nope.
So this is a Simpson style. Someone who thought they were putting in this small Spanish stopper.
It's my old brain.
Let me finish. And you want me to put your tickets with the real Spanish stopper? Yeah, so Spanish stopper is coastal, and the Simpson stopper is more inland. Spanish stopper is not really Simpson stopper. It's state threatened, goes all the way to Orlando. Spanish is really more tropical. I don't really think it's really north of like Palm Beach. The west coast it might go up to Tampa. But both are about the same size tree. The Spanish stopper is a little bit more color. Simpson stoppers nicer, in my opinion. Got more fragrant flowers that smell nice, and more pretty red berries. With this Spanish stopper, you get some seedlings as well as quarterweed. Then we have a nice assortment of some swamp milkweed. This is Sleepix Arnata. So this would be good for a saucer or a water feature because this grows in wetlands and cypress swamp. And the monarchs will use that. One of the better days to use to attract monarchs because it produces a lot of our milkweeds. We don't have a lot of them. And then there's some plants that use spade. That's it for the wrap. All right, so tonight we have our wonderful speaker. I think I met you, Noah, what, about 4 years ago? Either I met you first, you were with your parents buying plants from me, And I know you went hold a donut with Joe and I. That might have been it. He volunteered, and I was very impressed with his naturalist skills. Noah's a Miami native like me, a nature lover like me since childhood. He started bird watching at age 11 and remains an avid birder. That's an understatement. He's a top 10 birder. In my opinion, he's an excellent naturalist. He does use iNaturalist a lot. You can follow him on there. And he doesn't just do birds and plants, he does everything. Noah graduated from the University of Florida with a bachelor's degree in forest resources and conservation in 2021, and just completed the master's degree in environmental studies from Florida International University this past April. Also in 2021, he was hired by Fairchild Tropical Botanic Garden. They're very smart for hiring him. Is your title still a field biologist?
Wildlife now.
Wildlife biologist. And he's worked with native plant conservation teams since then. So let's give a warm welcome to Noah.
All right. Good evening, everyone. It's good to meet you. To those of you that I haven't met, this is my first chapter meeting that I've ever attended.
Speak up a little.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. So this is my presentation where I'm going to mostly talk about my thesis project while I was at FIU. Like Steve said, I graduated earlier this year, and I love birds. I also love nature, native plants. So this project was a merging of the two. And I'm happy to share some of the results with you, some of the main findings. The presentation will have two main parts. The first half, I'm going to go over sort of a general overview of birds, neotropical migrants in South Florida, and then some of the aspects of the ecology of the forest that they occupy in South Florida. And then I'll go into my thesis, some of the methods, the results, and then that'll be it. So here we go. I'll skip this because Steve already did it. Thank you, Steve. So let's get into the birds, neotropical migrants. This term may sound a bit complicated, but it's really just any bird that breeds in northern latitudes. It can be as far north as the tundra in the Arctic, or as far south as North Florida or Central Florida. And twice each year, they will complete a long distance and extremely impressive migration down to the southern hemisphere to overwinter. And this is mainly to take advantage of resources that would otherwise not be present to the north. So that map just shows the migration that happens in the springtime when the birds head north. They'll breed where the little summer symbol is. And then in the fall, they'll come back down. And right now we're actually in peak fall migration. So you may have noticed some of these little winged visitors in your yard or around town. And that'll wrap up pretty soon. There's a little short of 400 species of these neotropical migrants. They include hawks, shorebirds, songbirds. Most of what we see in the city in Miami are small songbirds called warblers. There's about 40 species that you can find in Miami. Some of them are quite rare. And then there's a small group that are very common. And those pictures at the bottom I took at the Cape Florida Banding Station when I used to volunteer there in high school. It was a great time where I learned a lot having birds in the hand. They capture these songbirds in migration. They put bands on their legs and then release them, and then hopefully recapture them to record data. Now on to the problem. Unfortunately, birds are declining in North America. A big paper came out in 2019 revealing that we had lost 3 billion total birds since 1970. The reasons for these losses are complicated and they are multifold. And more specifically, when looking at migratory birds, 28% of that group we have lost. And locally, one of my fellow graduate students that graduated earlier this year looked at the Cape Florida Banding Station data set that we have here from Billbag State Park and found that 10 out of 26 species there were also declining over 20 years. As for the knowledge gap that inspired my thesis project, when doing this literature search, I found a very small amount of published studies on this topic. And I now know why that is. It's very hard to quantify and research birds when they're migrating because there are so many stochastic events that influence what the habitat they'll choose. It could be weather, it could just be aspects of the forest on the ground, things they see from above when they're flying over that may be different when they land. And of course, birds can fly, so they can disperse once they land on the ground from their migration. So in South Florida, there really is not much out there in terms of looking at why birds choose specific habitats during migration to stop down, to eat, refuel, rest, and then continue. And that was what I wanted to explore with my thesis project. Now the study area, let's narrow it down a bit. I'm sure most of you are very familiar with this map. It's where most of us live. This is the Miami metropolitan area. It's an extremely urbanized landscape that has changed dramatically in the past 100 years. We've lost most of the natural ecosystems in this area in that time. And the human population is growing quite quickly. We'll almost be at 3 million people soon. Alongside that, tree canopy is decreasing, and the county is trying to address that with future plans in the next couple of years. But birds need trees, so at a local scale, these declines are surely tied to what's happening here in our city as we continue to urbanize. Now, neotropical migrants in the South Florida area, we can pretty much find them year-round, aside from maybe 1 month out of the year. But the migration windows are actually quite wide. The peaks happen in a smaller period of time, but in spring migration, it technically starts maybe in February, maybe even late January with some of these species, like the Louisiana water thrush. It's one of the first migrants that comes through. A lot of people aren't looking at this time because it's not really a time where you'd see a lot of diversity if you're looking specifically for spring migrants. And the same goes for summertime. In late June and July, some of the fall migrants start trickling in, and it's really hot outside. A lot of people aren't looking, but that's really when it starts. And then the peak happens a month or so later, and then that'll fizzle out in November. And another thing that's really unique about our area is that since we're so warm and subtropical, a lot of these migrants will just stop short here, and they won't continue over the Caribbean into Central America or other islands in the West Indies. They'll just treat this as an extension of that region. And this is really the only place in the United States where you can see birds of such diversity overwintering as a result of our climate. And of course, the plants that occupy and provide resources at winter time. And during migration and winter, surprisingly, you can find these migrants just about anywhere. It could be any random tree in a parking lot or shrub row in a park. Sometimes they're really desperate and not picky. And in the winter, sometimes I guess they just make do with these places, and they can surprisingly live off very little in our urban landscape. That there's an ovenbird on a trash can that I photographed at Sewell Park along the Miami River during migration. Sorry, wrong way. Now a bit about the study ecosystem that I selected for my thesis. So I'm sure most of you are familiar in some way with the Rockland hammock. It's a subtype of the hardwood hammock that is primarily found in Miami-Dade County along the feature known as the Miami Rock Ridge. It's rather diverse with a unique assemblage of neotropical trees. There's about 100 species of trees and shrubs that are found in the Rockland Hammock that kind of taper out not too far north of here. And some of them are at the northernmost limit of the range, but if you go into the Caribbean or the West Indies, you can also find those species. And this habitat has not experienced as dramatic loss as the pine rockland, which is less than 2%. We have about 20% of our rockland hammocks left in urban areas outside of Everglades National Park, but there's still not much left, and they are very valuable, especially to wildlife. And lastly, some of the threats to rockland hammocks that are currently persisting in urban areas are invasive plants, decreased connectivity due to urbanization surrounding them, and sea level rise. Now, as for some of the plants that you can find in the rockland hammock, these are also some of the species that were most common from my thesis data. Some of the understory plants are wild coffee. Some of them are available here for the raffle. The snowberry, white stopper, and some of the most abundant trees in the rockland hammock are the strangler fig, live oak, false mastic, and gumbo limbo. These rockland hammocks, they can have quite a bit of diversity in the extent of how degraded they are when it comes to invasive plants. On the right is an example of a clean hammock. So this one has very little invasive plant species coverage, and is dominated by natives. And then on the left is an example of a hammock overrun by an invasive plant called air potato, which is quite common in a lot of the rockland hammocks in urban Miami. And here are some satellite screen captures that I took showing what some of these rockland hammock fragments look like in our landscape. Some of them are quite large on the upper left, like the Deering Estate, then others are tiny. Upper right is Big and Little George Hammock. That's the neighborhood where I grew up. And then on the lower left, we have Simpson Park, which is a remnant of Brickell Hammock. And on the lower right is Hardin Hammock along the Florida Turnpike further south. Pineland?
Pineland hammocks are one thing in Rockland.
It's the same thing as far as I know.
She's wondering like pine rockland versus rockland.
Okay, it's the same thing.
Pine rockland is not the same as a rockland. A pine rockland only has one dominant tree species, and that's the slash pine.
Slash pine.
Yes. And the rockland hammock has a diverse assortment of broadleaf trees.
Pinelands are fire climax system. Fire. Rockland hammocks.
So this is another screen grab I took of a website called eBird that is a great resource for citizen scientists to submit their data. When they go birding, they submit checklists. And there are some nice summaries of these things called hotspots where people submit lists from. So these are the top 10 hotspots in Miami-Dade County for all time, with a total number of species ever recorded there. And I put a star next to those that have some component of a hammock associated with them, just to demonstrate that hammocks are known bird magnets in the landscape, and there are places that are typically frequented by birders and also frequented, of course, by birds. And that reason is that they're shady, they're very cool, they provide shelter in a hot environment, but they also provide a lot of food in the form of insects and fruit due to the diversity of plants present there. So now we'll shift gears a bit onto my thesis. So I'll start off by just going through some of my hypotheses for my project. So what makes a hammock a hotspot? I predicted, there were many more variables that I looked at, but these are some of the main ones that came out as significant predictors. So I predicted that plant diversity, food availability, forest complexity, and the total area of each hammock would be a positive influence on bird diversity. So that is, those sites that had these in higher numbers would have higher numbers of birds present. And then I also predicted that those sites further away from the coastline and those sites that had higher extent of urbanization surrounding them, so those that were more isolated, would have less bird diversity. As for my methods, for the bird data, I did what's called point count surveys. So I had these set locations in a hammock where I would stand for a fixed period of time, 20 minutes, and record all birds I saw or heard within a certain radius. And I did quite a lot of these surveys in 2024 across spring, fall, and winter. As for the vegetation data, I went to the same locations where I did the bird surveys. And within these plots, these circular plots, I collected data on tree diameters, what plant species were present in the area, different variables of the forest that would correlate with the birds present within each plot. And lastly, I looked at a data set, a LiDAR data set, which is basically an airplane flies above Miami and shoots lasers down, and those lasers return values for elevation, but also the canopy structure, so the tops of the trees. And with that, I could extract values for how uniform or how diverse the forest is from above. And that's a known predictor for bird diversity in other habitats, because they tend to like areas with more of a diverse structure because it offers more surfaces to feed and more areas for insects to occupy, which of course they like to eat. So for my project, I chose a variety of study sites. These are most of the rockland hammocks within urban Miami, so not in the Redland, but those surrounded by development neighborhoods or city areas. And they're owned by quite a few different stakeholders. Of course, the EO program owns most of the sites that I use for my project, but there were also some that, there's one that FIU owns, the FIU Nature Preserve, which is mostly at this point a rockland hammock. City of Miami, I went to Simpson Park, which is a City of Miami site. And I also went to the Barnacle, which is a state park. This is a sample map just showing what these circular plots I was talking about looked like from above within a hammock. This is Simpson Park. And each plot had a 20-meter radius. And then the center is where I would stand to do the bird surveys. And then in the whole circle is where I would wander around and collect data on the trees and the forest. This is a chart showing a calendar of all the dates that I went out to record bird data. My initial goal was to use the spring data set in my data analysis, but I didn't really have as much time to do that because I was still developing the project. And the master's is shorter, it's only 2 years. So I didn't get out as much as I wanted to in the springtime, but I made up for it in the fall with a lot more surveys. And that's where most of my data and the analysis came with positive findings. And I also went out in the winter to do some winter surveys. Here are a few photographic highlights from my surveys. On the upper left, there's a ruby-throated hummingbird nectaring on firebush. Lower left is a chuck-will's widow, a nocturnal bird, a nightjar that I found at quite a few of my sites, often just by scaring them off the ground as they were so well camouflaged during the day. In the middle, a rare orchid, Carter's orchid. I was pretty happy to see one flowering with the flower open in one of my plots. The upper right is a really neat cave feature showing that characteristic limestone substrate of the rockland hammock. And the lower right is a very secretive but exciting bird to find, the Swainton's warbler. I found quite a few of these in my plots. Usually you hear them before you see them as they're flipping out the leaves, looking for worms or bugs underneath them. But it's definitely, it looks just like a leaf on the ground. It's a hard tropical rockland hammock bird for sure. So this is a bubble plot summarizing every instance of a bird eating a fruit or a seed in all of my surveys across all seasons. I was hoping to get more data from this, but it's surprisingly hard to see these birds as they feed when you're in such a congested forest. But what I did see, I recorded, and I even got some pictures. I thought it was interesting to see some birds eating poison ivy. I had heard that it was a good food source, but never really witnessed it. And another interesting one was wild lime. I had also heard that birds like to eat them, but never actually seen it. I saw 2 different vireo species eating the wild lime seeds during a survey. And of course, the strangler fig, the Ficus aurea, is the most popular food source for neotropical migrants. Frugivory is just fruit eating. Fancy word. And the pictures, the top one is a red-eyed vireo. It was eating lancewood fruit, which I was kind of surprised they're so big, but it was getting them down. And I missed the picture. I missed the picture of it eating it, but it was. And then on the bottom is a rose-breasted grosbeak, a female bird, and it was eating the strangler fig fruit. Now, this is a pie chart summarizing the most common species I encountered across all of the surveys. So the ovenbird was the most common neotropical migrant within the rockland hammock across all my surveys. Not too surprising to me. They love a nice shady, secluded area with nice cover and leaf litter. So the hammock is the perfect habitat for that bird. Also, blue-gray gnatcatchers, pretty ubiquitous across the landscape during migration, so not a surprise either. Black-throated blue warbler, one of my favorites. Also, they like a nice forest, and that was one of the most common species across my surveys. Other birds, northern parula, black and white warbler, and American redstart were quite common. And the other category has quite a few other species, but it was a lot of 1s and 2s of things that are less common, a few thrushes, and a few rare warblers.
So you saw 682, reported 682 birds.
Yep, that was the total number of birds across all of my surveys. Now this is showing all the sites and all of the plots within each site. So each site has a color, and then each bar of that color corresponds to a plot within that site. Just showing which sites had the average number of species, the highest average per survey. And interestingly enough, the FIU Nature Preserve had the most number of birds per survey, followed by Hardin Hammock, Little George Hammock, and Big George Hammock. Some of the least species-rich sites were Arch Creek Park, Simpson Park, and East Reynolds, the barnacle.
Those areas front loaded with cats.
I saw very few cats during my surveys, maybe 2 or 3. But interestingly enough, I did see one deep in Hardin Hammock. There was an ovenbird escorting it through the hammock. It was chirping and following it along. Little George, I also saw. Also, an ovenbird at Little George was upset with that cat as well. I guess they're very, very watchful of the cats.
What if the birds were close to the coast too?
I know. I'll touch on that in a bit.
You probably answer this in the following by yourself, or you go out there with an assistant or two.
Most of the bird surveys, I was alone. I did have a field assistant who would go out the same time I would to a different site. He was a birder of mine, a friend of mine who we hired to help out with that. And for the plant surveys, I did also have someone helping me set up the plots. It was quite laborious.
When you record birds, is it passive or do you call to them?
No, so the methodology for this was you have to be silent. You're only observing what's occupying that plot without an influence. So if I were to pish or make a sound to attract the birds, then that would skew the bird data. It was kind of frustrating at times because when I'm birding, I'm used to sometimes making a sound to draw in something that I can't quite get a good look at. But I felt that was a less biased way to go about it. there were a lot of surveys with no birds, sadly. So now some of the main results. We're just going to look at the fall data set. It was the most robust and had the strongest trends. So the three positive predictors of neotropical migrant richness in the season across my surveys were distance to coastline. So those sites that were more inland had more birds, which was surprising to me. Plant species richness. So the number of plant species present in a plot correlated strongly with the number of bird species present in a plot. And the number of trees or shrubs that had ripe fruit on them within the plot was also a positive predictor. And a negative predictor, the only negative predictor was the percent urbanization surrounding each plot, which was one of my hypotheses. And that distance to coast, I suspect that that's just a result of some other variable influencing birds to occupy those sites that are more inland, not necessarily the fact that they're more inland, because at least in the springtime, which I didn't get to analyze, birds are known to fly over water, and they're actually usually present more in those sites along the coastline. But in the fall, birds are known to disperse more across the landscape. It's a more leisurely migration, and they're kind of present in all places. But it's likely that those sites along the coast had another variable influencing why birds wouldn't be occupying them as much, not necessarily the fact that they were, the reason was that they were along the coast. So looking a bit more closely at that plant species richness variable, since this is the Native Plant Society, I was curious, just because I did have a species list with all the native and non-native species present in a plot, to see if I separated the two, if they would independently contribute to that positive trend with migrant species richness. And they did. So those sites, those plots that had high invasive species, plant species richness, also had more bird species richness, which does kind of make sense because the plants are often invasive because the birds like to eat them to a certain extent. So within those plots that had more plant species, both invasive and native, there was more food availability. I don't think that's a reason to promote non-native plants, definitely not, because eventually those plants, non-native plants, invasive plants, will form a monoculture and crowd out the natives, and then down the line, there will be less total species richness for plants and then less bird species richness. But at least in the plots that I looked at, in the small subset of these hammocks, that seemed to be the case.
You talk about richness, but in your earlier slide, you also talked about plant diversity and like forest complexity. What is the difference? How are you differentiating between richness, diversity, and complexity?
The richness is a measure of diversity. You have richness, abundance, and you could also look at the two as they relate to each other. So that's just that's what I meant broadly speaking. And the complexity was more so looking at variables that I measured on the ground, like the DBH, tree heights, but also the LiDAR. But none of those ended up being significant predictors in the final model, unfortunately. So lastly, what you can do to help as homeowners and people with yards that like native plants. I'm sure most of you know, planting a nice little shady area with native fruit-producing shrubs and trees is a great way to help these migrants along their journeys. Providing a water source is also really crucial. If you can keep it clean or have a running fountain, that's almost more important than food in a lot of cases, especially during the spring when we have drought periods. The birds are desperate for water. And lastly, that picture speaks for itself. That was a recent iNaturalist observation I came across. I'd heard about cats eating migratory birds in other places, but I've never really seen a picture of it down here. And there is a feral cat that caught an ovenbird. So cats are known to kill many migratory birds across the landscape. They're one of the leading causes of bird declines that I mentioned earlier. So if you have pet cats, keep them inside if you can, if you want to help the migratory birds. I love cats. I have pet cats myself, but I think that they're very detrimental to these birds in the urban landscape. Here are a few acknowledgements. There were many, many people involved and organizations involved with my research project and my studies at FIU, my field assistants, my committee, Fairchild, of course, Jennifer Postley, my boss, and that is it. Any questions?
So I'm firstly great research project. Thanks for being here with us today. My question is, I'm very surprised that of all the sites you looked at, which have some of these really old grove, hammocks and really large trees, that the largest abundance of birds that you saw were at FIU. The preserve that I frequent a lot. Do you have any idea what might explain that abundance at that particular site?
I think in part it's FIU is so isolated in terms of a natural area that maybe there's that concentration of resources that sort of funneling the birds there when there's nowhere else to go around it on campus and beyond that. But also it was one of the sites with the highest number of plant species in each plot because in part a lot of it was planted. So there's things like red stopper and Spanish stopper that the university had planted over the years to sort of create a natural ecosystem, but that wouldn't have historically been there. So it has sort of an inflicted plant community, native plant community. And maybe that's also a reason, but there's a lot of unknowns with everything that I did and I'd like to explore it further, definitely.
Did any of your plots have a refuge in it, like a sinkhole, with a solution hole with water in it, or?
No standing water, no.
Brian, does he need to repeat the question?
Yeah, we have a few people on. So just so the folks on YouTube can hear, if you can repeat the question, sorry.
Sure. Any more questions? That's an oven bird, the most common bird I found across my surveys.
Did you rely on acoustics for the surveys, or are migratory birds generally non-vocal?
They are vocal, but oftentimes they're just giving single chip notes, especially the warblers that can be very difficult to distinguish from each other. But I was birding by ear during each survey, and I'm quite familiar with a lot of the more common bird chip notes. But of course, there were a few things that were impossible to identify.
Quick follow-up, did you consider using any acoustic recording devices like an audio log to round out the surveys? Or would that have resulted potentially in a higher bird count than the 20-minute intervals?
I thought about it, but again, since they're not really singing, most of those programs and softwares are keyed into the song of bird or the more diagnostic single note calls. And since they're mostly just giving chip notes that I don't think it would have picked up and identified as accurately, I decided not to use it.
So did you actually have to visually see a bird in order to include it in the survey?
No, if I heard it, it was enough.
Unless you couldn't tell what it was.
Wondering about that, before you slide you were put up there. Wondering about just you mentioned the strangler figure. What other? Wondering a little more about the species you looked at and which what better ones or what for growing birds.
I can go back to the slide. Would that help you? I just realized I haven't been repeating the question. Sorry.
You could appear the strangler fig, not every other tree on the spot. Strangler fig is the life.
The short-leaf fig. Roger Hammer says the short-leaf fig.
His data did not show that. I have a short-leaf fig in my yard.
The shortleaf fig was quite uncommon. I think only like one of my plots had one that was ever fruiting, and that one did have a lot of birds in it. But
Okay, good, because I have one in my yard.
Yeah, Roger Hammer says the short-leaf is the #1, but they're a lot harder to find.
Go on birding trips. They hit like the birders know.
So yeah, there is the shortleaf fig. There's two other ficus in the plot. It's quite hard to see, but one of them is a non-native Ficus altissima, which birds also like. But then yeah, to the right of Ficus aurea is Ficus citrifolia. I did see a northern parula eating fruit from one on one occasion. And other species, gumbo limbo, I know personally from other observations, that's a really good bird plant. Vireos love to eat those red seeds, tanagers. It also attracts insects, flycatchers.
The fig family is the second most important tree family in the world for wildlife, I believe. Number one is orchids, oaks.
That's reflected here.
Yeah, the oaks aren't here just because I was mainly looking at fruit, and a lot of the birds in oaks are insectivorous, so it'd be harder to quantify that. But most definitely, it's one of the best bird trees.
Did you look at insect,
I did not. I would have liked to, but it was a very time-constrained
For the PhD.
study.
Yeah.
There's a gentleman in the back in the red shirt has a question.
Do you happen to come across any people trapping birds? You said that they're flying birds in your surface?
I'll start repeating your question. Okay, he asked if I came across anyone trapping birds, and I did not. No, but in the past I have in other sites, not during the surveys. It's quite common in Miami, more than you'd think. He asked if I picked a set time of day or if it varied. And 90% of the surveys were done between 7 and 11 a.m. in the morning, which is generally the peak activity time. On a few occasions, I had to do a few in the late afternoon, which it's not as good, but also birds get more active later in the day as well.
7 to 11 is the prime time for activity.
So I've got one question from the folks joining virtually. One person asking if you plan to revisit the plots that you surveyed and see any changes in plant diversity and bird species.
That's a great question. I would like to. I don't know if that'll happen anytime soon, but it's always a possibility.
I have really enjoyed watching the burglars in my yard the last few days. And there's a black iron one. And so, one of the members gardener, Joey Bosma, was at my yard today, and I was telling him how many warblers sit and just look at the tree, and all of a sudden you'll see a little action in the leaves. And he said that they have spiders. He thinks that their spider webs or spider nests are in there, and that they might be eating the baby spiders. And I thought that was very exciting to learn. So
Interesting.
that was an observation. The comment is that when I first started looking at bird books, I saw warblers, male, female, juvenile, spring, and fall. All those different colors, I'll call them, for one bird. And so I got to take your tour a few weeks ago and was amazed at how well you know your birds.
Thank you.
It's very hard.
That it is, yes. It takes years of practice. Yep. Since I was a wee lad. I did a bird tour for the chapter a week or two ago.
What's the best bird tree in your yard?
In my yard is relatively new. I don't have many large trees, but a Simpson stopper has been very hot this season, and I can vouch for it. I had quite an uncommon bird come to it and eat fruit, a yellow-breasted chat. I was very excited about. So Simpson stopper is a good bird plant.
Yeah, there was one time when mine was full of fruit and I planned on collecting the fruit to bring to the nursery, and they were gone.
Put out bird feeders, man.
For the fruitiferous birds, they like the fruit.
There was a woman at Fairchild Garden who worked there for many years, Mary Collins, and she used to write the brochure for the plant sales. And one of the plant descriptions, she called the Columbrina elliptica, soldier wood, the best warbler attractor. Now, I have two of them in my yard. I don't see much bird action around it. And I have no idea where she got the information.
I have also heard
A
that.
lot of trees, yeah.
From what I've seen, those flowers have a lot of nectar and they attract a lot of small ants and these tiny little insects. And maybe that's why people see a lot of warblers and small songbirds on them. I personally haven't really witnessed that either, but there's not many trees, large trees that I could study to see if that's true or not.
And they're flowering now. So they're flowering when the warblers are passing through and something else, the locust berry is not flowering. Well, they're not going to visit it. They're going to visit what's flowering in October.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Has anyone else seen birds on their soldier wood? There you go. I think it's gone forever. Sorry. Unless we bring one back from the dead and clone it some way. But I do think it's extinct. She wanted to know what I thought of the ivory-billed woodpecker. Anyone else?
Was this all new information for you, or did it correlate with some of that data that you said there wasn't much of when you first started this?
Most of the stuff, I guess. Wait, your question was what? Like more specifically?
Was all the information new to you, or did it correlate with the other data that you had?
She wants to know if the information was new or if it correlated with existing data. And I didn't really have any existing data that was formally collected. It was more so just my observations over the years, lists, notes. And in terms of other research studies, none of them really were on these topics specifically. So yeah, it is all new for the region, at least for South Florida. Yes.
Seedlings around in your yard, because I've noticed that my number one seedling is Gumbarimba. So I know the birds eat that. And I go out and read them periodically. So if you look and see what the seedlings are around, that can give you kind of an idea of what they're eating.
That's a great idea. Very true. I didn't in my study, but that's a great point. In my yard, I also have tons of gumbo limbo popping up. Sometimes some invasive plants as well. It's the birds like those.
What is the northernmost bird signs migratory?
So the bird that breeds furthest north and travels through our area, that's a difficult question to answer. It would probably be the black pole warbler. I saw a few of them, but it's one of the warblers that is known to migrate the longest because it breeds so far north in temperate coniferous areas in Canada, and then winters in South America, well south of the equator. So I would say the black pole warbler. I have to look though out of the 100 species. I have to double check that, but off the top of my head, that's what I'd say. Black pole warbler.
I saw years ago when I was in California, usually feeding on my flora. I think it's a cute.
Exceptional. Interesting. Yeah, the birders always hope that the Cuban emerald would show up. Is that what you think it was, the Cuban emerald? It's possible. Birds sometimes wander over from Cuba and the Caribbean. They're residents that are non-migratory, so you never know. That's an interesting record. One more question. The yellow cardinal? I heard about it too. Yeah. What do you want to know about it? Yeah, it's real. It's a genetic mutation, like albinism, leucism. It's just an off chance thing that happens quite rarely. there was a yellow cardinal in Gainesville a few years ago when I was at UF as well. So it's not totally unheard of, but still very cool.
All right, let's give them a big thank. Raffle in about 10 minutes. You can buy tickets from Karina in the back. And it's only 2 signed tote bags left. I got one of them.
Great job, buddy.
Thank you.
Just need the audience.
Yeah.
Definitely don't forget your plan. Are you gonna plan it at home?
How you doing, Oliver?
Hey, nice to meet you.
How long have we known Jennifer Postleigh?
Since 2021, in person. Before that, I knew her through iNaturalist for a few years.
She helped me with my Eagle project.
Oh, really?
Cool. It's true.
So you see your charge tonight.
Daniel Wheeler. Will do.
I saw that go, oh, wow.
Yeah, makes me excited for the next one.
How did you quantify?
Say again?
That would be good to have a
I didn't quantify it. I used
Yeah, if they haven't met, I think that would be a
fellow
good
graduate
connection
student.
to show that.
He hasn't published it yet. He looked at historical aerial imagery.
The number one
Get a valley.
Hammock Park.
What's like?
County.
Hold that photograph information if anybody ever, wants to make a.
Yeah, once you got 40 years.
Yeah.
You know what's the number
I know.
one?
Yeah. Contact. I'm curious.
Well, I'm just, yeah.
What's
Website address, Jeff.